What is a credit rating?
It is when a credit rating agency evaluates the risk of an institution defaulting on its debt. So, for example, will a company be able to pay back the money it has borrowed?
So what's a credit rating agency? They are the companies that assign the credit ratings to the institutions. Is there more than one credit rating agency, and is one more important than the other? Standard & Poor's, Moody's and Fitch are the three main credit rating agencies that rate countries. Standard & Poor's and Moody's have been most high profile and influential in their ratings. So who gets credit ratings? Both government and private institutions, such as companies and banks, get credit ratings. So countries can have credit ratings? Governments have credit ratings to signal to investors the riskiness of the bonds they issue. A country's credit rating will often determine the price of its bonds and the yield investors receive on them. The higher the credit rating, the higher the price of the bond and the lower the yield, as it is a less risky investment. So if a country has a higher credit rating, it is usually cheaper for governments to raise funding in the international markets, as people are more willing to buy their safe bonds. What is the difference between a rating for a country and a rating for a bank? Essentially, credit ratings for countries and companies, including banks, assess the same thing: the ability or willingness of an institution to pay their debts. However, credit rating agencies use different criteria in assessing countries and companies. For countries, credit rating agencies assess not just information on government finances, such as debt and deficit levels, but also economic and political information, such as debt levels for the country as a whole, economic growth prospects, the quality of economic policies, and stability of the political environment. For companies, credit rating agencies mainly focus on company financial information and their earnings and profit prospects. So what's the difference between the ratings? Is an AA- really that much worse than a AAA? This is where things get a little more complicated. Different agencies use slightly different criteria and rating scales. AAA or AAA is the top rating that an institution can get, and D is the worst. At the top end of the rating scale, there wouldn't be much difference in the riskiness between a AAA rating and an AA- rating. But once you get down to the BBB rating and below, the riskiness of the securities becomes much greater, and governments or institutions would need to pay a much higher cost to borrow. What does a credit rating downgrade, or a low credit rating, mean for a country? If a country's credit rating is downgraded, it is usually because the likelihood of repaying its debts has decreased. A credit rating downgrade can happen if a country's debt level or the interest they pay on that debt increases, or if their political systems become unstable or untrustworthy. Credit ratings can be useful indicators of credit quality, but they are not the be-all and end-all for investors deciding on whether to invest in a country. Generally, countries with higher ratings find it cheaper to raise funds on the international bond market. So if a country gets a downgrade, they will find it more expensive to raise funds and will have to issue more bonds to raise the funds that they need. But this is not always the case. The US, for example, has an AA+ rating and is able to raise funds more cheaply than other AA+ countries, as investors still see US government bonds as one of the safest in the world. And what about New Zealand? How does our credit rating compare to other countries? New Zealand currently has a Standard & Poor's foreign currency credit rating of AA, which is the same as Belgium, and only one grade behind the US, France and Austria. So we're still in good company even though we were downgraded recently. New Zealand is ranked considerably ahead of troubled Eurozone countries like Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece and Ireland, which have Standard & Poor's ratings in the A to CC range, rating them as being medium to high risk of debt default. So we've already had one downgrade, are we at risk of another? Standard & Poor's and Fitch downgraded New Zealand's credit rating from a AA+ to a AA in September last year, citing the increasing risks presented by the widening gap between New Zealand's earnings and spending, our rising national debt levels, and the effects of a deteriorating global economy. It is possible they may downgrade New Zealand in the future if the international environment deteriorates further. It is difficult to predict what effect further rating downgrades in themselves will have on New Zealand. The recent downgrades did not affect the New Zealand government's funding costs. In fact, the interest on New Zealand government bonds have fallen to record lows in recent months. The effect of further downgrades will depend on the reasons for the downgrades and what is happening internationally at the time.